The golden cage, Nadia merchant had never imagined her life would include crystal chandeliers and private jets. At 30, she was proud of the path she'd carved, graduating top of her class, building a reputation as one of the sharpest financial consultants in the city, all while sending money home to her mother in their small apartment in Riverside Heights. The nonprofit gala wasn't her usual scene. She'd been hired to audit the foundation's books, but the organizers insisted she attend the event itself. "You should see where the money goes," they'd said. So there she stood in a borrowed evening gown, clutching a glass of champagne she hadn't touched, watching wealthy donors write checks with the same casualness she used to buy groceries. That's when Damien Cross approached her. He didn't introduce himself with his title or his net worth. He simply asked what she thought about the foundation's latest initiative. Nadia, assuming he was another consultant, spoke candidly about the financial inefficiencies she'd noticed. He listened intently, asked intelligent questions, and by the end of their conversation, she felt something she rarely experienced, truly heard. It wasn't until her colleague pulled her aside, eyes wide with shock, that Nadia learned she'd just spent 40 minutes critiquing a charity program to the billionaire who'd founded it. "That's Damien Cross," her colleague whispered urgently. "He's worth $8 billion. Nadia's stomach dropped, but when she turned to apologize, Damien was smiling. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "I want to hear more of what I'm doing wrong." The romance that followed felt like a dream. Damien was charming, attentive, and genuinely interested in her mind. He'd text her articles about financial reform at midnight. He'd surprise her with books by economists she admired. For the first time, Nadia felt seen, not just as a woman, but as an equal intellectual partner. But slowly, subtly, things began to shift. It started with suggestions. "Wear the blue dress tonight. It photographs better." Then concerns. "That neighborhood you work in isn't safe. Let my driver take you." Soon he was reviewing her client list, suggesting she decline certain projects. "You don't need to work so hard anymore," he'd say, stroking her hair. "I can take care of you," Nadia's mother noticed during Sunday dinner. "He calls you 6 times when you're here for 2 hours, she observed quietly. "That's not love, Habibti. That's surveillance," but Nadia dismissed it. Damien had childhood trauma, she reasoned. His parents died in an accident. Control was how he processed anxiety. When he proposed 6 months later with a ring that cost more than her childhood home, she said yes. The wedding planning became Damien's production. He chose the venue, the exclusive Grand Meridian Hotel overlooking the Pacific. He selected her dress designer. He even edited the guest list, removing several of Nadia's college friends. "They don't fit the aesthetic," he explained smoothly. The night before the wedding, Nadia stood in her hotel suite, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back wore a designer nightgown and diamond earrings, but her eyes held a question she was afraid to answer. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Damien. "Sleep well, my beautiful bride. Tomorrow, you become mine completely." Nadia's hands trembled as she set the phone down. Completely. The word echoed in her mind long after she turned off the lights. The altar of shame. The morning of her wedding day, Nadia woke to an army of stylists transforming her hotel suite into a beauty command center. Hair, makeup, nails, every detail orchestrated with military precision. Through the window, she could see the ceremony setup on the oceanfront terrace. 500 white chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arch draped in orchids that cost more than most people's cars, and a carpet so pristine it seemed criminal to walk on it. Her mother arrived at noon. Wearing the modest cream dress they'd chosen together, one of the few decisions Damien hadn't overruled. She took Nadia's hands, studying her daughter's face beneath the professionally applied makeup. "It's not too late," she whispered in Arabic, quiet enough that the stylists wouldn't hear. "If your heart is telling you something, listen to it." But Nadia shook her head. Cold feet were normal, weren't they? Every bride felt nervous. She'd invested so much into this relationship, changed her entire life, reshaped her career around Damien's schedule, distanced herself from friends he deemed unsuitable. Walking away now would mean admitting she'd been wrong about everything. By 3 o'clock, Nadia stood in her wedding gown, a masterpiece of silk and lace that Damien's personal shopper had selected. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it wasn't quite her style. Too much embellishment, too many crystals. She'd wanted something simpler, but Damien had insisted. "This is a statement wedding," he'd said. "Everything must be perfect." The ceremony was scheduled for 4. At 3:30, guests began filling the terrace. Nadia could hear the string quartet playing, the murmur of excited conversation, the click of expensive heels on marble. Through her suite's French doors, she glimpsed celebrity faces, tech industry moguls, politicians. Half of these people she'd never met, 3:45. Her mother helped adjust her veil, while bridesmaids, women Damien's sister had selected barely acquaintances of Nadia's, fussed with the train of her dress. 3:55. The wedding planner knocked. 5 minutes, Ms. Merchant. The groom should be taking his position now. 4 o'clock. Nadia stood at the terrace entrance, bouquet trembling in her hands. The processional music began. But at the end of the aisle, beside the orchid-covered arch, the spot where Damien should have been standing remained empty. 4:10. Confused whispers rippled through the crowd. The officiant checked his phone discreetly. Nadia's heart hammered against her ribcage, each beat asking the question she couldn't voice. "Where is he?" 4:20. Damien's best man finally approached, his face pale. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "Damien, he's not coming. He asked me to tell you he can't go through with it." The words hit Nadia like a physical blow. Around her, the whispers exploded into open conversation. Phones appeared. Cameras flashed. 500 guests, powerful, influential people who thrived on gossip, witnessed her humiliation in real time. She stood frozen in her perfect dress, holding her perfect bouquet beneath the perfect arch. As her perfect wedding day collapsed into nightmare, someone in the crowd was already typing on their phone. Within minutes, it would be everywhere. "Billionaire abandons bride at altar." Nadia's mother appeared at her side, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Come, Habibti. We're leaving." But Nadia couldn't move. Her mind was reeling, trying to process not just the abandonment, but the method. Damien hadn't even had the courage to tell her himself. He'd sent a proxy. He'd let her stand there in front of everyone and made her humiliation a spectacle. "Why?" she whispered. The best man shifted uncomfortably. He said he realized he needs someone who understands his world better, someone already part of it. The final insult. After everything she'd sacrificed, every part of herself she'd reshaped to fit into his life, she still wasn't enough. Wasn't polished enough, connected enough, wealthy enough. Somehow Nadia's legs carried her back through the hotel, her mother and one sympathetic bridesmaid flanking her like guards. Behind them, the crowd's noise swelled. Shock, pity, and worse, the excitement of witnessing a scandal. In the bridal suite, Nadia finally looked at her phone. 73 messages. News alerts already appeared. Tech billionaire Damien Cross leaves fiancé at altar. Wedding of the year ends in disaster. The photos were already circulating. Her standing alone at the altar, confusion and pain raw on her face. Her mother carefully removed the veil, unpinned the elaborate hairstyle. "Let them talk," she said firmly. "Let the whole world talk. You are not defined by his cruelty." But as Nadia sat in her wedding dress, mascara finally streaking down her cheeks, she felt defined by nothing else. The woman who'd once confidently corrected a billionaire's business strategies now couldn't even understand why she wasn't worth marrying. Outside, the sun set over the Pacific, turning the sky into shades of orange and pink, the perfect backdrop for a wedding that never happened. That night, after her mother finally convinced her to remove the dress, Nadia lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling. The humiliation was crushing, yes. The heartbreak was real. But beneath both, something else was stirring, a cold, clear anger. Damien had controlled every aspect of their relationship, and when he was done, he'd discarded her as publicly and painfully as possible. He'd turned her love into a spectacle, her trust into a joke, but he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated what she was capable of when she stopped trying to please him and started thinking for herself. The hidden truth: for 3 weeks, Nadia disappeared. The media camped outside her apartment building, hungry for tears and statements. Her phone exploded with calls from reporters, concerned acquaintances, and former colleagues offering hollow sympathy. She ignored them all. Instead, she sat at her dining table surrounded by documents, hundreds of pages of financial records, contracts and corporate filings she'd worked on during her relationship with Damien. As his unofficial financial advisor, she'd had access to nearly everything about Cross Technologies. At the time, she'd been helping him optimize his company structure. Now, she was looking at those same documents with entirely different eyes. Her mother brought tea and meals she barely touched. "What are you looking for?" she asked on day 5. "The truth," Nadia replied, her eyes red from sleepless nights. Something felt wrong even then, but I ignored my instincts. I won't make that mistake again. The irregularities started small, expenses that didn't quite match their descriptions. Consultant fees paid to companies she couldn't verify existed. But as she dug deeper, following threads through subsidiary corporations and offshore accounts, a picture emerged that made her blood run cold. Cross Technologies, the company everyone believed was a tech industry titan, was bleeding money. Damien had been covering losses for years through increasingly desperate measures, falsified revenue reports, shell companies that existed only on paper, and loans secured through fraudulent collateral. But the most interesting discovery was a name that appeared repeatedly in older documents, then vanished completely about 5 years ago: Julian Torres. A quick search revealed Julian had been Damien's co-founder, the actual technical genius behind Cross Technologies' original innovations. Then suddenly he was gone. The official story was that he'd sold his shares and moved on. But the documents told a different story. Signatures that looked coerced, board meetings Julian hadn't attended, and a payout far below what his stake should have been worth. Nadia found Julian teaching computer science at a state university, a stark contrast to Damien's luxury lifestyle. When she called, he was understandably suspicious. "Why would Damien Cross's ex-fiancé want to talk to me?" he asked cautiously. "Because I think you were cheated," Nadia said bluntly, "and I think I can prove it." They met at a quiet cafe far from prying media eyes. Julian arrived looking skeptical, dressed in jeans and a university sweatshirt, nothing like the tech moguls in Damien's orbit. He was handsome in an understated way, with intelligent dark eyes and an air of quiet competence that reminded Nadia of who she used to be before Damien. "I saw the wedding coverage," Julian said carefully as he sat down. "I'm sorry for what happened to you." "Don't be," Nadia replied, sliding a folder across the table. "It was the best thing that could have happened. It made me stop being blind." For the next 2 hours, she walked him through what she'd found. Julian's expression shifted from skepticism to anger to grim satisfaction as he reviewed documents he'd never seen before. "I knew something was wrong when he forced me out," Julian said finally, "but I couldn't prove it. He had lawyers, connections, money. I had nothing except my certainty that the company we built together had been stolen from me." He looked up at Nadia. "Why are you showing me this? What do you want?" "Justice," Nadia said simply. "Not revenge, justice. Damien humiliated me, yes, but he's been defrauding investors, shareholders, and partners for years. You weren't the only one he betrayed, just the first." Julian leaned back, studying her. "You realize if we pursue this, it won't be quiet. The media attention on you is already intense. This would make it worse." "Let them watch," Nadia said, thinking of standing alone at that altar while cameras flashed. "I'm done caring what people think." Over the following weeks, Nadia and Julian worked together with an intensity that surprised them both. He understood the technical side of Cross Technologies, the actual innovations versus Damien's smoke and mirrors. She understood the financial mechanisms and corporate structures. Together, they were formidable. They discovered that Damien had mortgaged his majority shares through a complex web of loans, desperate to maintain his lifestyle while the company hemorrhaged money. More importantly, They found that several board members had growing concerns about the company's direction, but lacked the information to act. "We need to move carefully," Julian warned during one late-night work session at Nadia's apartment. "Damien has powerful friends. Damien has people who like being associated with wealth," Nadia corrected. "Once they realize that wealth is an illusion propped up by fraud, they'll abandon him faster than he left me at the altar." Julian smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "You're not what I expected. What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone broken, maybe?" "The media made it seem like you were devastated." "I was," Nadia admitted. "For about 3 days, I was completely shattered. Then I got angry. And anger, it turns out, is much more useful than heartbreak." As they worked, Nadia began to see the man Damien had betrayed and erased. Julian was brilliant but humble, passionate about actual innovation rather than publicity. He asked her opinion on strategy, listened when she spoke, and treated her as an equal partner. The contrast with Damien's patronizing control was stark. One evening, reviewing the final pieces of their case, Julian looked at her seriously. "You know this will destroy him, right? Cross Technologies is his entire identity." Nadia thought about standing in that wedding dress, about the years of subtle control, about how Damien had reshaped her into someone she barely recognized, then discarded her publicly when she no longer served his purposes. "Good," she said quietly. "Maybe he'll learn what it feels like to lose everything." They filed their findings with the Securities and Exchange Commission and requested an emergency board meeting, citing urgent concerns about the company's financial stability and leadership. The board, already nervous about recent quarterly reports, agreed immediately. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks away. Damien, confident in his control and distracted by his new relationship, photos had surfaced of him with a senator's daughter, barely paid attention to the notice. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did the world. The takeover. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Nadia arrived at Cross Technologies headquarters at 8:30, wearing a Navy suit that projected authority without ostentation. Her old self. The confident financial consultant who'd once corrected a billionaire without knowing who he was. Julian met her in the lobby. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 5 weeks," Nadia replied. The boardroom on the 42nd floor offered panoramic views of the city skyline. 12 board members filed in, their expressions ranging from curious to annoyed at having their schedules disrupted. Most were Damien's appointees, wealthy investors more interested in the prestige of association than actual governance. But 3 were serious business people who'd grown increasingly concerned about the company's trajectory. Damien arrived at 8:55, clearly expecting a quick formality. He stopped dead when he saw Nadia and Julian sitting at the conference table. "What is this?" he demanded, his charm vanishing instantly. "An emergency board meeting," said Patricia Holloway, the board chair and one of the company's original investors. "Requested by Mr. Torres and Ms. Merchant, based on concerns about the company's financial integrity." "Sit down, Damien." For the first time since Nadia had known him, Damien looked uncertain, but he recovered quickly, sliding into his seat with practiced confidence. "I don't know what Julian has told you," he said smoothly, "but he's had a grudge since we parted ways years ago." "And Ms. Merchant?" His eyes flickered to Nadia with something cold beneath the surface. "Well, we all know she has her own reasons to want to cause trouble." "Actually," Nadia said calmly, opening her laptop, "this has nothing to do with personal grievances and everything to do with securities fraud, falsified financial reports, and systematic theft from shareholders." The room went silent. For the next 90 minutes, Nadia and Julian presented their findings with clinical precision. Shell companies that existed only to shuffle money and create the illusion of revenue. Loans secured using falsified company valuations. Consultant fees paid to entities that provided no actual services. Revenue projections that bore no relationship to reality. Julian demonstrated how Damien had claimed credit for innovations actually developed by teams Damien had barely interacted with, while the company's actual technical development had stalled years ago. The revolutionary new platform Damien had promised investors was vaporware, Nothing but mock-ups and marketing materials. Furthermore, Nadia continued, pulling up another document, Mr. Cross has personally borrowed against his shares to maintain his lifestyle, meaning he no longer controls the majority stake he claims. The actual ownership is distributed among various creditors who have no idea their collateral is worthless. One board member, an older man who'd made his fortune in manufacturing, leaned forward. Are you saying Cross Technologies is essentially bankrupt? Not yet, Julian interjected. The company has real assets, patents, talented employees, existing contracts. But under current leadership, it's heading toward collapse, probably within 18 months. Damien had been silent during the presentation, his face growing progressively paler. Now he erupted. This is slander. These documents were obtained illegally. I obtained them, Nadia said quietly. You gave me access yourself, remember? When you wanted me to help optimize your corporate structure, I was acting as your financial consultant. Every document here was legally available to me in that capacity. You manipulative, Damien started. Choose your next words carefully, Patricia Holloway interrupted coldly. Ms. Merchant has presented documented evidence of fraud. If even half of this is accurate, we're looking at regulatory investigations, investor lawsuits, and criminal charges. She turned to Damien. Do you have any evidence that refutes these allegations? Damien opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, Nadia saw him truly cornered. His charm, his connections, his wealth, none of it mattered against documents and data. I move that we suspend Mr. Cross from all leadership positions, pending a full investigation, said another board member. Seconded, said two others. Simultaneously. Wait, Damien said desperately. You can't just, I built this company. I am Cross Technologies. No, Julian said quietly. We built this company. I wrote the original code. I developed the innovations. You were just better at selling them and at taking credit. The vote was swift. 10 in favor of suspension, 2 abstentions, Damien's closest allies, and Damien himself, who'd lost his composure enough to actually curse during a board meeting. Who's going to run the company then? One board member asked. We need immediate leadership. Patricia looked at Julian. Mr. Torres, you're the original co-founder and, according to these documents, were illegally forced out. Would you consider returning as interim CEO? Julian glanced at Nadia before answering. Only if Ms. Merchant serves as chief financial officer. This company needs both technical and financial restructuring. We work as a team or not at all. Another swift vote. Approved. Damien stared at them in disbelief. You can't do this! My lawyers. We'll advise you that your only option is to cooperate with the SEC investigation and hope for leniency, Nadia said. Because if you fight this, Julian and I will ensure every detail becomes public. The fraud, the theft, the embezzlement, all of it. She stood, gathering her materials. As she passed Damien's chair, she paused. You left me at the altar because I wasn't enough for your world, she said quietly, so only he could hear. Turns out your world was built on lies. I guess I should thank you. Staying would have made me complicit. Damien's face twisted with impotent rage, but he said nothing. There was nothing to say. As Nadia and Julian left the boardroom, escorted by security to Damien's office to begin the transition, she felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. Free. Not vindicated, not triumphant, just free. In the executive office, Damien's former throne room with its designer furniture and ego wall of magazine covers, Julian turned to her. That was impressive, he said. Terrifying but impressive, Nadia smiled. You haven't seen anything yet? Now comes the hard part, actually fixing this mess. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread out beneath them. It was the same view Damien had commanded, but somehow it looked entirely different. Full of possibility instead of domination. Somewhere in the building below, Damien was being escorted out by security, his access cards deactivated, his authority revoked, his empire crumbling. He'd left her at the altar. She'd taken his company, and honestly, it felt like she'd gotten the better deal. The real victory. 6 months later, Nadia sat in the same office, now significantly redecorated, the ego wall replaced with whiteboards covered in project timelines and innovation roadmaps, reviewing quarterly reports. For the first time in 3 years, Cross Technologies had posted honest numbers. They weren't spectacular, but they were real, and more importantly, they showed steady improvement. The fallout from Damien's removal had been intense, but ultimately cathartic. The SEC investigation had uncovered even more fraud than Nadia and Julian had initially found. Criminal charges were filed. Damien's assets were frozen. The media, which had gleefully covered Nadia's humiliation at the altar, now chronicled Damien's spectacular fall with equal enthusiasm. Some journalists tried to frame it as a revenge story, but Nadia refused that narrative in every interview. This wasn't revenge, she'd told a reporter just last week. Revenge is emotional and petty. This was accountability. There's a difference. What surprised her most was how much she enjoyed the actual work. Not the drama or the vindication, but the challenge of rebuilding a company with integrity. She and Julian made a formidable team. His technical vision combined with her financial acumen meant they could both dream big and execute practically. They'd had to make hard decisions. 20% of the staff had been let go, mostly in redundant marketing and PR positions Damien had created to feed his ego. But they'd invested heavily in R&D, promoted talented engineers who'd been overlooked, and established transparent reporting structures. The employees who remained were energized, finally working for a company that valued substance over spectacle. Julian appeared in her doorway, holding 2 coffee cups. It had become their afternoon ritual, a break to discuss strategy, upcoming challenges, or sometimes nothing work-related at all. "Investor call go well?" he asked, handing her a cup. "Better than expected. They appreciate honesty even when the news isn't perfect." Nadia took a sip, then smiled. 3 of them specifically mentioned that they trust us more than they ever trusted Damien. Apparently, boring and reliable is appealing after years of flashy promises. Julian laughed, settling into the chair across from her desk. Boring and reliable. We should put that on our business cards. Over the months of working together, their relationship had evolved beyond professional partnership. It had been gradual, conversations that stretched beyond business hours, shared meals that weren't quite dates but felt like something more, moments of understanding that went deeper than strategy. Julian had never pushed, never pressured. After Damien's suffocating control, that patience meant everything. "I got another interview request," Nadia said, changing the subject. "This one wants to focus on the woman who turned humiliation into power. Are you going to do it?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to move on completely, stop being defined by what Damien did. But another part thinks maybe the story helps people, shows them that being left, being humiliated, being discarded, it doesn't have to be the end of your story." "It wasn't the end of yours," Julian said quietly. "It was the beginning." Nadia met his eyes. Over months of working together, she'd learned to read his expressions. The slight tension that meant he was worried about company finances, the focused intensity when he was problem-solving, and this look, warm and steady, that she'd only recently allowed herself to acknowledge. "I've been thinking," Julian said carefully, "about what comes next. The company is stable now. We've got solid leadership below us. We could step back a bit, have lives outside these walls." "Are you saying we work too much?" "I'm saying maybe we could work normal hours and spend our free time." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Doing things we enjoy, together, deliberately." Nadia's heart quickened. After Damien, she'd been so cautious, so afraid of misreading signals or falling into old patterns. But Julian wasn't Damien. He didn't control or manipulate. He asked and listened. He offered and respected boundaries. "Like a date?" she asked, keeping her tone light despite the vulnerability she felt. "Like many dates," Julian replied with a smile. "If you're interested, no pressure, no expectations, just possibility." Before she could answer, Nadia's phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at it automatically, then froze. Damien Cross sentenced to 8 years for securities fraud. Julian noticed her expression. "The verdict came down?" Nadia read through the article quickly. 8 years in federal prison, full restitution to defrauded investors, and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer or director of any public company. The senator's daughter he'd been photographing with had vanished from his life the moment the indictments came down. How quickly he'd been abandoned when the money disappeared. She waited for triumph or satisfaction, but felt only a distant sadness for the man Damien might have been if he'd valued substance over appearance. Partnership over control. How do you feel? Julian asked. Honestly, I feel nothing about him anymore, Nadia replied. He's a closed chapter. I'm more interested in what comes next. She stood, moving around the desk to where Julian sat. For months, they'd maintained professional distance despite the growing connection between them. But she was done being cautious out of fear. Damien had made her afraid of her own judgment, second-guess her instincts. That ended now. Yes, she said. Yes, to dates. To possibility. To whatever comes next. Together. Julian stood, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then he reached out, taking her hand with a gentleness that made her throat tight. No grabbing, no possessing, just an invitation she could accept or decline. She stepped closer. Their first kiss was nothing like the consuming passion Damien had used to overwhelm her defenses. It was softer, questioning, equal. It tasted like coffee and felt like coming home to herself. When they pulled apart, both smiling slightly, Nadia's phone buzzed again. This time it was her mother. Saw the news about the sentencing. Are you okay, Habibti? Nadia typed back. More than okay. Actually happy. Come to dinner Sunday. I want you to meet someone properly. She'd introduced Julian to her mother months ago, but always in professional contexts. This was different. This was bringing him into her real life, her family, her authentic self that she'd lost somewhere in Damien's golden cage. That evening, as Nadia drove home to her apartment, the same modest place she'd lived before Damien, which she'd never given up despite his pressure to move somewhere more appropriate. She thought about the woman who'd stood at that altar 6 months ago. That woman had been heartbroken, humiliated, lost. She'd defined herself by Damien's approval and shattered when it was withdrawn. But that altar moment, as painful as it was, had been a gift. It had forced her to remember who she was beneath all the reshaping and compromising. A woman who'd corrected a billionaire's business strategy without hesitation, who'd built a career through competence and integrity, who'd survived far worse than a canceled wedding and emerged stronger. The media had wanted a revenge story. Scorned woman destroys ex-fiancé's empire. But that wasn't what happened. Nadia had simply done what she always did. Looked at the facts, followed the truth, and taken action based on evidence and ethics. That Damien's empire collapsed under honest scrutiny wasn't revenge. It was the inevitable result of building something on lies. The real victory wasn't taking his company. It was reclaiming herself. When the next interview request came, a women's business magazine wanting to feature her story, Nadia agreed, but she insisted on certain parameters. The focus wouldn't be Damien's betrayal or even the takeover. It would be about rebuilding with integrity, about partnership over ego, about the difference between revenge and accountability. The interview's final question was, what would you say to women who've been left, betrayed or made to feel they aren't enough? Nadia had thought carefully before answering. I'd say that being rejected by someone who doesn't value you isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a revelation of their limitations. Damien left me at the altar, and for a moment I felt destroyed. But that moment was him removing himself from my life before I wasted years figuring out I deserved better. The best revenge isn't destroying someone who hurt you. It's building a life so authentic, so fulfilling, that they become irrelevant to your happiness. That's real power, not dominating someone else, but fully inhabiting your own life. The article came out 2 months later with the headline, Nadia Merchant, the CFO who found freedom at the altar. It went viral, not for the scandal, but for the message. A year after the canceled wedding, Nadia and Julian stood on a different beach, not a grand hotel terrace, but a quiet stretch of sand where they'd taken a weekend trip. No cameras, no guests, no spectacle. Just them and the ocean and the setting sun. Thank you, Julian said suddenly. For what? For trusting me. For giving us a chance. I know after Damien, it would have been easier to close yourself off completely. Nadia leaned against him, feeling his arm wrap around her shoulders, protective but not possessive. You know what's funny? I thought what I had with Damien was love because it was intense and consuming. But this, she gestured between them, this quiet, steady thing where we're both fully ourselves, this is so much better. Boring and reliable? Julian teased. Revolutionary and real, Nadia corrected. They stood there as the sun dropped below the horizon, turning the sky shades of purple and gold. Somewhere in a federal